British politicians, UK politicians, police, etc., did know that this was occurring at some level and covered it up. Well, that's why Elon started bringing up this Tommy Robinson stuff and the grooming gang stuff, to change the subject so that people don't realize that he wants to take away white people in the United States. I don't think that's the case. Maybe there's part of him that's like redirected conversation, but I do think it has to do with the Tommy Robinson stuff. I don't know the specific nature of why Tommy was jailed this time. All I know is let's steelman this position as best as possible. Reports range from thousands to hundreds of thousands of girls in the UK, starting in the 80s, going for decades, were groomed by Pakistani Muslim gangs. This went on for decades, very little done about it. And then internal investigation showed that at least some politicians and police knew of it and didn't do anything. And some of the reasons that we've been told why this occurred was for racial relations, that had this been made public, that people would have been upset. The hundreds of thousands number, I don't know. To me, it seems like what they've done is they've took like the numbers in Rotterdam, how many cases there were there, and then said, okay, if that makes up 2% of the Pakistani Muslim refugees, immigrants, whatever, if we multiply by the population of those people, this is how many victims we're likely to have. I don't know that that's the best way to look at it. But let's just say at the minimum it was thousands. Let's say it was 4,000 or 5,000. It's grotesque, horrific. And even if it was in one, and the reason that justice wasn't served was because of the color of the person's skin, and it was like, well, we don't want to make a big deal out of this because we're afraid that it'll lead to racism. That's horrific. But let's be honest. As bad of a scale of thousands over decades is, that's not hundreds of thousands. I'm not saying it's not hundreds of thousands, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that these numbers matter. The scale of that's very different. For example, let's take it to something maybe we're more familiar with in the United States. Any time that an innocent person is shot and killed by police, it's unacceptable and it's horrific. But if we have riots for racial justice all across this country because the narrative is police are killing thousands of unarmed black men a year and the real number is like 8, you see the big difference there. But here's the problem. Let's start with the premise that British politicians, UK politicians, police, etc., did know that this was occurring at some level and covered it up. Do you trust those groups to now give you accurate data? Look at how bad the data is in the United States, whether it be our job numbers that we see months later get revised, almost always in the same direction, at least under the Biden administration. Border numbers. When you have organizations investigating themselves that are accused of wrongdoing, do you think that they're going to give you an accurate depiction of what happened? Or are they going to cover their ass? So how can we have a fair account? Now maybe the accusation's bullshit. Maybe it was 1 or 2 people that said, yeah, we didn't want to say anything because they were Muslim. That sucks then, because people are distrusting based on the accusation. My gut feeling is, because it matches up with so much that we see also occurring in the UK right now and around the world. For example, in the UK, it seems that there's more of a punishment if you happen to be a person making a joke online about gender ideology or making a comment on some place like Facebook because you don't like the mass amount of refugees that are coming in. You get thrown to jail, but if you're one of the refugees that are actually engaged in acts of violence on the street or something in the course of a riot, maybe not so much. So it would make sense if we see that problem today, that it was something that was occurring in the past as well. But I don't have much to add to what I have already said on this, which I think, to me, it's one of the most profound stories that I've ever read about, because even before I was a father, I have to imagine that if there was ever a line that would put you to, of the worst things that could occur in your life would be for children to be victimized repeatedly in the most horrific and heinous of ways. And for that to occur systemically, thousands upon thousands of times, by people that were brought in from outside the country, and then to have the people that were supposed to be looking out for you, your police, your politicians, not just stand idly by and let it happen, but then actually aggressively go after people that are trying to fight back, whether it be Tommy Robinson or there's countless other cases where there's been reports of angry parents showed up to try to get their children back and were arrested themselves, or girls as young as 11 going to the police saying, help, I was just victimized, and them being arrested for being drunk or on drugs. That, to me, is as horrific as it gets. And what I saw in the UK was more anger at someone like Tommy Robinson than the actual gangs that did the grooming or the politicians and police that covered up for it. That's what I saw. That's what I continue to see. Now it's too late, maybe. Too late now. Now even if you wanted to get upset and complain about it, you'll go to jail. That wasn't always the case. I mean, it was for someone like Tommy. So when I hear people say all the time, they'd say, well, if something happened in this country, we wouldn't stand for this. If the government did this, we wouldn't stand for it. I remember during the pandemic, if you would have told people 15 years ago, they'll just say you're non-essential, you basically can't leave your home, you can't go to work, you can't go visit your mom in a nursing home, you can't have a funeral for your grandparents, you can't have a wedding for your daughter. People would say, no chance that would happen in this country. But it happened. And when I saw what happened in the UK, now granted, the UK is a different country than the United States, but other than Canada, what's the most similar country to the United States? Probably the UK. And they watched their daughters groomed in the most heinous ways possible. Found out that their politicians and police officers covered it up. How many of those politicians or police officers have been held accountable? How many have been fired? How many have faced criminal repercussions? And that, oh, well, what can you do? But when you have someone like Tommy Robinson, they're like, oh, that's not who we are. And you just shake your head. You're like, how can this be? And so now the story, Elon talking about it a lot on X has brought the story to the forefront again. I hope justice is served. Those cowards, if there was one police officer or one politician, and I'm sure there were many, that knew this was occurring and turned the blind eye to it, because they were like, well, racism's, may they live in eternal shame at the very least. I hope none of them could sleep at night. At the worst, or at the best, it is the most indescribable moral cowardice imaginable. Allowing the most vulnerable of us, children, to be sexually exploited in the most horrific of ways. So what? You as an adult don't have to worry about being called a racist? Intentionally allowing the victimization of children. Because as an adult, you're like, well, I don't want someone to call me a mean name. It was the same type of shit with the pandemic, where we punished children. We knew that schools were one of the safest places to be. Oh, but they could spread the virus to the parents, to the teachers. So we're intentionally harming children for the benefit of adults? What does that say about our society? So I hope this story never loses traction. It never should. Just like the pandemic shouldn't, and all that shit. Just like people after the assassination attempt like Destiny. They were like, well, the worst thing could happen was the assassin shot at Trump and he lived. None of that shit should ever be forgotten.